The Prime Minister has got some recent news of 3 of his cabinet ministers have been found guilty for bribery. A people's representative has been found guilty for bribery. That's 4 parliamentarians, Lord Fakafanua, that's been found guilty for bribery. How does that affect Parliament?
Yeah, well, the fact that 3 of them are in cabinet affects Parliament in that our first agenda for this year is the government budget. And the Prime Minister has sent a letter to the Speaker and to Parliament requesting that we defer the scheduled sitting from 16th of May due to the fact that all of this is happening within the government. But the delay will allow government to refocus itself and present the budget as they're supposed to.
That deferral of Parliament, is the date set by you, the Speaker of Parliament, or is it set by the Prime Minister and Cabinet?
Well, actually, you have to remember that the work of Parliament foremostly is to pass legislation, and the budget is the most important legislation because we need to finance all of the work of government. And the only agenda we have right now in terms of legislation is the government budget. So if the government's not ready with their budget, then that will have an impact on when Parliament will sit to deliberate that legislation.
With the 4 parliamentarians, especially with their verdict coming out guilty, are they unseated, Lord Fakafanua, automatically once the verdict is out, or do they wait for Parliament to sit and Parliament unseats them?
That's prescribed in the legislation under the Electoral Act. If a member of Parliament is found guilty of committing electoral bribery, then they will be unseated by Parliament.
By Parliament,
it actually says shall be unseated by the Legislative Assembly. That unseating will happen at the next sitting of Parliament. The only precedence we've had for that, the last precedence was in 2016 with Lavu Lavu, where the Supreme Court certified that his election was void on a Friday, and because Parliament was already sitting, he was unseated on the next sitting, which was the Monday after.
Does these 4 parliamentarians have to attend the Parliament to be unseated, or can they be unseated with those seats vacant?
They should be there. And whether they come or not, I think is not the point. The point is that the Legislative Assembly needs to comply with the Electoral Act and go through with the unseating at the next sitting of the House.
I know the first sitting of Parliament is supposed to be the 16th of May, which is next Monday. How is this delay affect everything?
So by delaying the sitting of Parliament because the government's not ready with the budget, for those who are waiting to be unseated, they will have a chance to lodge their appeal and potentially ask for the Supreme Court to stay the ruling. No, to my knowledge, and back to 1990, cases like this have not been granted a stay by the court.
If any of these 4 parliamentarians appeal to the Court of Appeal the decision from the Supreme Court, and as you mentioned on your answer before, if this appeal is heard after you guys sit in Parliament for the unseating will continue?
We have to go through the unseating because the guilty verdict triggers the unseating. And the only thing that can undo that would be another Supreme Court. As a matter of due process, Parliament has to do with the unseating. And the delay right now could potentially allow those who are affected to go back to the courts. And the thing is, under the law, we have to submit the budget, and it has to be on our agenda before the end of the month, before the 30th. So the delay cannot be beyond that.
After, say, these parliamentarians are unseated, and then they appeal to the Court of Appeal, and the Supreme Court decision is overturned, do they get their seat back?
If the seat is still vacant and their void election is overturned, they become legitimate members, then they will assume their seat. But if the appeal is heard and we get a judgment after a by-election, the seat will no longer be vacant for them to return to. And they will essentially become victims of the law.
Okay. I know that the punishment that all four of these parliamentarians got, it isn't just to void the election. They're also banned for running again for parliament for 5 years.
They cannot run for parliament for 5 years.
5 years, yeah.
Which basically stops them from returning over the next election, so there will be 2 terms out of parliament.
Lord Fakafanua, I asked you before about if the Supreme Court decision is overturned and their appeal to the Court of Appeal is successful, but if it's been heard after the by-election, then they become a victim to the law. Would this mean that the 5-year ban will be taken off them and they're eligible to run for the next election?
Yes. Yes, it will no longer apply.
Okay. With these cases, and I know it's going to happen a lot, with every election, there's going to be a civil court case.
I'm quite optimistic, Lala, because I think that we're still in the early stages of our democracy, and this is part of the teething issue. My predecessor, Lord Lasike, when he lost his seat, even though that was a criminal case that he was acquitted of, those gaps in the law we filled so that if an appeal is heard from a criminal case and gets overturned, they can still return to their seat. But in terms of bribery during the election, we're now finding out that there are some things that we need to refine in terms of the timeline. And I believe that the reason why things have stretched out was because of the natural disaster on the 15th of January, followed by COVID, and that sort of impacted the schedule for these petitions to be heard. But I think ideally the Supreme Court in the future might hear these petitions after an election in November, in January or February, meaning that the appeal could be heard by May, which is the first Court of Appeal. So given that Court of Appeal sits in May and around, I think, September, the current round of petitions have missed the May. And it would be up to the Lord Chief Justice to have a special session, but I can't speak to that. That's up to Chief Justice and the judges.
And I'm optimistic as well, Lord Fakafanua. And what's happened now, the opinion that's come in from the people right now is to stay within the law of the election commission or within the rules of the election commission.
The law is really clear because it already states and gives you the boundary for, what is a bribery, what is legitimate campaign. There are limits to how much you can spend within the 6 months leading to the election. I think what these cases have done is clarified what the MP can do and what would give them reason to be petitioned. So I think it's good for future elections and also for future candidates. They'll be aware of where the limits are to what will be deemed illegal under the Electoral Act. And what is legitimate campaign spending.
Lord Fakafanua, what you're saying is there's exemption within the Electoral Act that allows these candidates when it comes to gifting?
The exemption there is for family.
Okay.
So if the candidate is spending money on his family and their regular expenses, that's exempted, and also charitable organizations and churches. But I think we still need to be careful, because if it's in the ordinary donation that he makes, then that should be exempted anyway. So some of that nuance and interpretation will be up to the courts, and I think the recent judgments I haven't finished reading sort of helped clarify that as well.
Yeah, and I saw the decision as well, Lord Fakafanua, and I'm hoping the future candidates that's running for parliament will read the election law, and also within our culture follow these laws.
Yeah, maybe the parliament in the future might refine the Electoral Act. So there are talks about having like a sliding scale for the amount, because what we've seen in the cases is that, $5 is the same as 7,000. I have reservations about applying a sliding scale, because bribery should be black and white, not a grey area. But there are other ways of addressing people's concerns about that, like the cultural considerations. We can even put in, like, raise the limit before bribery will be triggered. So different ways of addressing it, but I think it's something that both the Electoral Commission and Parliament will be looking at in the future, and hopefully we might help resolve some of these issues that have come up from the election last year.